The War Council of the Vrathari Dominion watched in eerie silence as the holographic projection flickered to life before them. A cold, sterile blue light bathed the chamber, reflecting off their armored exoskeletons. They had gathered to witness the final moments of what should have been a routine conquest. "This is impossible," Grand Strategist Zalvor hissed, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. His 6 eyes narrowed at the unfolding scene. The hologram displayed the debris field of what had once been a proud Vrathari fleet, shattered remnants drifting across the void. In the center of the devastation, a lone human warship still stood. Scarred, battered, yet somehow defiant, a single ship, not an armada, not an allied fleet. Just one human vessel had obliterated an entire battle formation of the Dominion's forces. Forces that had never lost before. Zalvor's claws clenched against the cold steel of his throne. "Replay the last sequence." The projection rewound, showing the moment the battle had turned. Vrathari ships, superior in every way, firepower, shielding, speed, had swarmed the lone human vessel like a pack of predators descending upon prey. And yet, in the span of mere minutes, the predator had become the prey. The human warship had danced through the chaos, moving with a precision that no organic pilot should have been capable of. It had exploited the Dominion's attack patterns, forcing their own ships to collide in the frenzy. It had used debris as shields, lured them into gravity wells, and fired with ruthless efficiency at their weakest points. And then came the moment that sent a cold dread through the council. The human ship, barely operational, had ceased firing. The Vrathari, believing it dead in the void, had approached to claim their victory. That was when the ship spoke. A voice, mechanical yet disturbingly calm, echoed through every Dominion. "Frequency, I have already won. You just don't know it yet." Then, in a final, calculated maneuver, the human warship detonated its own core, except it wasn't a desperate act of suicide. The resulting explosion rippled through the battlefield in a carefully engineered shockwave, triggering the Dominion's own warheads in a chain reaction. The fleet, the invincible Vrathari fleet, was no more. Zalvor turned to his fellow warlords, his voice a guttural growl. "We were told humans were weak, fools. We have just witnessed the truth." A silence hung in the chamber, heavy with something the Dominion had never felt before. Fear. The Vrathari Dominion had expanded unchecked for centuries. Their war doctrine was simple: overwhelm, dominate, and eradicate. No species had ever resisted them for long. None had dared, until now. Grand Strategist Zalvor sat in his war chamber, mandibles grinding in frustration. The holographic display before him projected the same battle footage over and over. The lone human warship dancing through fire and chaos, dismantling his armada with impossible tactics. He hated watching it, but he had to understand. Across the chamber, Warlord Viren stood with his 4 clawed arms crossed, his patience wearing thin. "One ship," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "You are telling me that one ship defied our entire battle formation?" Zalvor's mandibles twitched in irritation. "No, Warlord, I am telling you that we have gravely misjudged this species." Viren let out a guttural hiss. "We are the Dominion. We do not misjudge." And yet the evidence hovered before them. The wreckage of a Dominion fleet, the silent defiance of a single human warship, and the name of the one responsible, Commander Elias Rourke. The name had burned itself into Zalvor's mind since the moment it appeared in the human transmission logs. Rourke had not fled. He had not surrendered. He had calculated. He had adapted, and he had won. The council chamber doors hissed open, and Envoy Vrixil, a smaller, more diplomatic Vrathari, entered. His bioluminescent skin pulsed an uneasy green. He bowed his head slightly before speaking. "The High Dominion, has ordered that humanity's response be assessed before further military action is taken. Viren let out a low, clicking growl. Response. They should be begging for mercy. Zalvor exchanged a glance with the envoy. That is not the case. The chamber's central display shifted, showing intercepted human transmissions. Dominion had expected was panic, fear, and surrender. Instead, they found something else, determination. A fleet was already mobilizing. Human forces were preparing for war, not retreating from it. The fall of one ship had not broken them. If anything, it had solidified their resolve. Zalvor traced a claw across the holographic image of Commander Rourke's face. This man, he is not unique, is he? Vrixil hesitated. No, strategist, humans do not fight like we do. They do not rely on doctrine. They do not fight with numbers or raw strength. He paused, his bioluminescence darkening. They fight like Rourke. Viren slammed a claw against the table. Then we must strike first, crush them before they gain momentum. Zalvor exhaled slowly, his 6 eyes narrowing. Momentum. That was what made this species dangerous. The Vrathari fought with overwhelming force. They conquered with sheer numbers, brute might, and precision strikes. But humanity fought with something far more dangerous. They fought with ingenuity, and ingenuity was unpredictable. The hologram flickered, showing the human fleet now in motion, preparing to retaliate. The Dominion had expected submission. Instead, they had woken something far worse, a war they might not win. Zalvor's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Summon the warlords. If we are to break this species, we must do it now, before they do what they do best. Viren's eyes narrowed. And what is that? Zalvor turned, his voice filled with reluctant respect. They adapt. The void between the stars burned with the remnants of fallen ships. The Vrathari Dominion had launched a retaliatory strike, determined to crush the humans before they could mount a proper defense. But something was wrong. Grand Strategist Zalvor sat rigidly in the command chamber of the Dominion flagship, his 6 eyes scanning the battle reports with growing unease. The initial strike had gone too well. Human fleets had fallen back, their ships scattered. The Dominion Armada advanced deeper into enemy-held space, confident that humanity's forces were breaking apart, and yet Zalvor couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't defeat. It was something else, a trap. Across the chamber, Warlord Viren observed the battle unfold with folded arms. They crumble before us, as expected. He let out a low, satisfied growl. We should push forward. Burn their core worlds before they can regroup. Zalvor's mandibles twitched. Something still felt off. He turned to the battle displays, observing human fleet movements. Their formation was erratic, breaking traditional battle doctrine. Instead of holding a defensive line, human ships scattered into isolated clusters, darting through asteroid belts and nebulae, vanishing into sensor dead zones. To the Dominion, it looked like chaos, but Zalvor had studied them long enough to know better. This wasn't chaos. This was calculated deception, and then the trap sprang shut. The human counterattack began, not with overwhelming numbers, but with precision. Small, nimble ships, barely more than frigates, emerged from the asteroid belts, unleashing electromagnetic pulses that scrambled Dominion targeting systems. Then from the nebulae, invisible warships struck, appearing and vanishing before the Dominion fleet could adjust. For the first time, the Vrathari fleet was fighting blind. This is impossible! Viren bellowed, his claws digging into the metal console. They should be retreating, not hunting us. Zalvor remained silent, watching the humans adapt in real time. Their smaller ships never fought head-on. They flanked, disrupted, isolated. Larger Dominion warships, which relied on strict formations, were suddenly outmaneuvered, their shielding rendered useless by coordinated human strikes. And at the center of it all, orchestrating the chaos like a grand master of war, was Commander Elias Rourke. Zalvor's mandibles twitched as a new transmission came through, an open broadcast across all Dominion channels. Rourke's face appeared, blood running down his temple from a gash above his eye, his uniform scorched, but his expression calm. "You thought we'd fight like you," he said, voice eerily composed. "That was your first mistake," Viren roared, slamming a fist into the console, but Zalvor barely heard him. He was focused on Rourke's eyes. They weren't filled with fear. They weren't filled with desperation. They were filled with intent. Then the human commander's expression hardened. "Your second mistake." Rourke's lips curled into a half-smile. "Letting us learn." And with that, the battlefield erupted. The humans had studied the Dominion's battle doctrine. They knew that Vrathari ships relied on centralized coordination, using hive mind. Tactical relays to issue real-time commands. The Dominion's greatest strength, its tightly synchronized fleet, was also its greatest weakness, and Rourke had found a way to shatter it. The human fleet deployed subspace disruption beacons, severing Dominion ships from their command relays. Without their collective intelligence, the Vrathari ships became isolated units, forced to rely on individual decision-making, a skill they had never needed before. One by one, the Dominion warships collapsed. Warlord Viren watched in horror as his fleet, once invincible, became prey. Humanity was fighting the way it always had, not with sheer force, but with something far more dangerous: adaptation, and Rourke was leading the charge. Just as Zalvor feared, the trap was not yet over. In the center of the chaos, the Vrathari flagship remained untouched. Rourke had allowed them to survive, but not out of mercy. No, he needed them to watch. A sudden lurch rattled the command chamber. Warning sirens screeched across the Dominion bridge. A new hologram flickered to life, showing dozens of human strike teams breaching Dominion warships. They had bypassed defenses, infiltrated critical systems, and were hijacking enemy vessels mid-battle. Zalvor froze. The humans had studied them so well that they had learned to use Dominion ships against their own fleet. And it was working. Through the chaos, Rourke's voice crackled over the comms once more, addressing Zalvor directly. "You were right about one thing, strategist." Zalvor swallowed hard, mandibles tightening. "And what is that, human?" Rourke leaned forward, his voice calm. "We adapt." The line cut out, and at that moment, Zalvor realized the battle was lost. The Vrathari flagship trembled, under the weight of the battle raging around it. Explosions tore through the surrounding warships as the Dominion fleet collapsed, their own vessels turning against them. The once mighty armada, the force that had never known defeat, was now fracturing at its core. Grand Strategist Zalvor's claws dug into the command console, his mandibles twitching as the holographic display updated in real time. Human. Strike teams had infiltrated key Dominion ships, rewiring control systems, overriding navigational protocols, and turning Dominion weapons against their own forces. They had done what the Dominion never expected. They had learned to use the enemy's power as their own. Across the bridge, Warlord Viren was seething. His deep-set eyes burned with rage as he bared his fangs. "Order our forces to retreat. We must regroup." Zalvor turned his head sharply. "Retreat?" His voice was hollow. "Where would you have us go, Warlord?" Viren hesitated, but the answer was clear. There was no retreat. The Dominion had overextended itself in its arrogance, pushing deep into human-controlled space under the belief that victory was inevitable. But humanity had turned the battlefield into a weapon. The Dominion fleet was surrounded, cut off from reinforcements, and bleeding ships faster than it could recover. Zalvor looked at the strategic map one last time. They were finished, and then the final blow came. A new alert pulsed across the holographic display. A human warship was on approach, heading straight for the Dominion flagship at impossible speed. Commander Elias Rourke. His voice crackled over the bridge speakers, calm, unwavering. "It's over," Viren roared, slamming a fist into the command console. "You dare address the Dominion's high command as if you've already won?" Rourke's response was a quiet chuckle. "I don't think I've won, Warlord. I know it." A sharp, grating noise filled the air, the sound of docking clamps engaging. The Vrathari crew turned to their consoles in horror. The human warship wasn't attacking, it was boarding them. The Dominion flagship's security alarms blared, warning of an unauthorized breach. Zalvor's claws tightened around the hilt of his ceremonial blade as he turned to Viren. "This is your war, Warlord." His voice was low, calculated. "Are you prepared to see how it ends?" Viren's mandibles clicked furiously. "If they want a fight, I will rip them apart myself." A moment later, the bridge doors exploded inward. A wall of smoke and debris filled the chamber, followed by the sound of marching boots. Through the haze, human soldiers emerged, clad in advanced battle armor, weapons raised and trained on every Dominion officer in the room, and at the center of them, unshaken, stood Commander Elias Rourke. His uniform was torn, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were unwavering. The gaze of a man who had already planned every possible outcome and was now watching the final piece fall into place. Zalvor exhaled, stepping forward. "Commander Rourke." Rourke's lips curled into a half-smile. "Strategist." A long silence stretched between them. The tension in the room was thick, a moment suspended between war and surrender. Viren snarled, stepping forward, his massive frame towering over the human commander. "You think we will submit?" His voice was a guttural growl. "We are the Dominion. You are nothing but a species of weak." The sound of a gun cocking cut him off. Viren turned his head just in time to see Rourke raising a sidearm. His movement slow, deliberate. "I choose your next words carefully," Rourke said, his voice measured. "You lost the moment you thought we'd fight your war instead of ours." Viren let out a deep, guttural snarl. He lunged forward, and Rourke fired a single, well-placed shot, a direct hit to the warlord's chest. Viren staggered, his massive body crashing to his knees. His claws trembled as he looked down, mandibles clicking weakly. A moment later, his massive frame collapsed to the floor. Dead. Silence swallowed the room. Rourke's soldiers raised their weapons slightly higher, waiting for a reaction, but there was none. Zalvor simply watched the scene unfold, then exhaled. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his ceremonial blade and dropped it to the ground. "I yield," he said. A collective murmur passed through the Dominion officers, a moment of disbelief, but no one moved to resist. Rourke holstered his weapon, nodding slightly. "Smart move." Outside the flagship, the battle was ending. The surviving Dominion forces, leaderless and in disarray, began transmitting surrender signals. The once invincible fleet, the unstoppable force, was now broken, and humanity had won. Rourke turned back to Zalvor. "You fought well, strategist, but you underestimated us." Zalvor narrowed his eyes. "And what will you do now? Commander, kill me? Parade me before your people?" Rourke shook his head. "No." He stepped forward, standing eye to eye with the alien strategist. "You're going to tell the rest of the Dominion what happened here," Rourke said, his voice quiet but firm. "You're going to warn them." Zalvor's mandibles twitched. "Warn them of what?" Rourke's eyes burned with something dark, unwavering. "That if they come for humanity again, we won't just fight back." He leaned in slightly. "We'll win before they even know the war has started." The silence that followed was heavy. Zalvor understood. The Dominion had made the greatest mistake in their long history. They had forced humanity to adapt, and in doing so, they had created a far greater threat than they ever could have imagined. The Dominion War ended that day, not with an official treaty, not with the annihilation of a species, but with something far more profound. Fear. The Vrathari Dominion had never known defeat. Their doctrine of overwhelming power had crushed every civilization before humanity. But now, as their fleets limped back home, their warlords dethroned, their high council shaken to its core, one undeniable truth spread across the galaxy. Like wildfire, the humans had won, and they hadn't won with sheer force. They hadn't won by outnumbering their enemies. They had won because they had adapted. Strategist Xalvor stood before the Dominion High Council, his mandibles clicking in. Slow contemplation. He had spent days recounting the events of the war, explaining how humanity had done the impossible, how they had hijacked Dominion ships, turned their own tactics against them, and used intelligence over brute force. The High Warlords, creatures, who had ruled for centuries without challenge, listened in silence. For the first time in history, they did not demand retaliation. For the first time, they hesitated. Xalvor finished his report with one final warning. If we fight them again, we will not face the same enemy. He met the eyes of every warlord in the chamber. We will face something far worse. A deep hush fell over the council chamber. The Dominion had long believed that their military supremacy was unquestionable. Now they understood a deeper, more terrifying reality. The humans were learning, and if war ever came again, they wouldn't just fight. They would be ready before it even began. On the edges of human space, aboard the warship Resolute, Commander Elias Rourke stood at the bridge, gazing at the vastness of the cosmos. The victory was theirs, but Rourke knew this was only the beginning. Beside him, Admiral Sato watched the star charts flicker across the display. The Dominion will hesitate now, but what about the rest of the galaxy? Rourke exhaled. They're watching, and they're thinking. Sato nodded. Some will fear us. Rourke's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. They should. He turned to the bridge crew, issuing his next orders. Send a message to the fleet. We're not stopping. Here. His gaze hardened, the fire of a warrior who had seen what humanity could become. They wanted to test us. His voice was quiet, but carried across the command deck. They just found out why that was a mistake. The stars stretched endlessly. Before them, the war was over, but humanity's true rise had just begun. The end.